Do you, Marshall Drake, take this woman to be your lawful wife? Arizona Territory, 1876. The Mission Church in Red Hollow rose over a street baked hard by sun, its lime-washed walls glowing in the noon glare. Inside, the air hung heavy with perfume, candle smoke, and the rustle of Sunday best. Every pew was packed. Plowmen in patched coats, their wives in stiff bodices, shopkeepers with glittering watch chains, all drawn to watch Marshall Drake, a prosperous trader, wed Lydia Harrow, eldest daughter of a family strangled by debt. At the rail, Lydia trembled inside a plain white dress. The lace had yellowed. Her bouquet of dry blooms felt like it might crumble if she breathed too hard. Behind her, her parents sat rigid as fence posts, eyes fixed on Marshall, their last hopes hitched to the dowry he'd promised. Marshall stood tall in his fine coat, the faint reek of cigars clinging to him, his narrow smile like a tally mark on a ledger rather than a sign of warmth. The priest's voice rose, solemn, carrying under the rafters. "I do," Marshall answered smoothly, as if closing a deal. "And do you, Lydia Harrow?" The vow broke off. From a side chamber came the sharp cry of an infant. Heads turned, necks craning. A pale serving girl stepped out, clutching a swaddled baby. The wail rolled across the nave like thunder off the flats. Gasps rippled. "She's been hiding a child," someone hissed. "Shameful," another spat. Lydia's bouquet slipped, tapping stone. Marshall's face went dark. "You lied to me," he roared, voice echoing off the rafters. "You expect me to raise another man's brat? Please." Her voice failed, drowned by whispers rising into open jeers. Marshall ripped a ring from his pocket and hurled it at her feet. "There'll be no wedding. Let Red Hollow see what she is." Do you feel the floor tilting beneath her? And what stranger would break that silence? Quick aside, if these frontier tales pull you in, tap subscribe and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Now back to the story. The room broke into uproar. Mothers drew daughters close. Men muttered about disgrace. Lydia's father stood and left without a word. Her mother followed, skirts brushing past their own child as if she were no more than dust. "Wait!" Lydia cried, reaching for them, but they did not turn. Her knees buckled. She stumbled from the altar, clutching the baby to her chest. Tears blurred her sight, while insults rained like grit. She sank at the foot of the steps, her sobs lost in the clamor. And then a hush moved through the crowd. A long, cool shadow crossed the aisle. Boots struck wood, slow, deliberate. Silas Boone. The rancher had stood near the back, quiet as always, shoulders broad, skin burned by years of sun. A man who kept to himself, known more for hard work than talk. He stopped beside Lydia. For a long breath, he said nothing, gray eyes steady. Then his voice came low, gravel rough, slicing through the last whispers. "She'll sleep under my roof tonight." A murmur swept the room, scorn from some, surprise from others, but no one mistook the finality in his tone. He offered his hand. Lydia hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his calloused palm. He lifted her gently, steadying her as if she weighed nothing at all. The child quieted against her. Marshall sneered from the altar, but his bluster thinned under Silas's unreadable gaze. Without another word, the rancher guided Lydia up the aisle, his arm firm around her shoulders. The doors blew open, and the wind rushed in, scattering him sheets and guttering candles. Together they stepped into the rain, leaving behind jeers, shame, and a shattered promise that had never been love to begin with. What sort of life waited beyond those doors? And what would Red Hollow do next? The desert stretched empty and wide as Silas guided his horse across the flats, night wind needling their skin. Behind him, Lydia held fast to the saddle, the child pressed against her, her dress still damp from the storm. She knew almost nothing of the man who'd spoken for her, Silas Boone, a rancher light on words. Yet she rode with him now, each hoofbeat carrying her farther from humiliation and a life measured in other people's bargains. At last, his homestead appeared out of the dark, a squat ranch house of weathered planks, roof patched against last winter's gusts, fences running to cattle pens that creaked in the wind. It wasn't the spread of a wealthy man, but of one who built and mended until things held. Silas swung down and turned to lift Lydia gently. Her legs wobbled. His hands steadied her as if easing a startled colt. She opened her mouth. Thanks, apology, surely something, but no words came. His silence made room for hers. He opened the door and motioned her inside. The room smelled of wood smoke and leather. A scarred table by the hearth, shelves lined with jars, a rifle in the corner, boots by the threshold. The home of a man who asked little but honest labor and space to breathe. Silas hung her shawl to drip dry, struck a match, coaxed a fire awake. Shadows leapt. He set on a kettle, fixed a stubborn window latch, and pulled a folded blanket from a trunk, laying it neat across the bed. Lydia stood in the doorway, cradling the baby, confusion knotted with gratitude. Why would he do this? Why offer shelter when a whole town had looked away? The child whimpered. Silas warmed a strip of cloth by the flames and handed it over. The baby quieted, sinking into sleep. Lydia's throat ached. Word would not come, only tears did. Yet the silence here wasn't cruel. It held like a roof in a storm. The hours thinned. The fire settled. Lydia dared to believe the night might pass in peace. Then boots scuffed the dirt. Voices sliced the quiet. Lantern light wavered across the windows. "Open up, Boone," a man barked. "You're hiding her. That liar and her bastard don't belong under your roof." The baby stirred, crying again. Lydia clutched it, hands shaking. The pounding grew. "Bring her out. The town'll judge her proper. She'll ruin you too, rancher." The porch boards groaned under weight. Then a crash. The latch tore free and the door slammed back. A man lunged, hand reaching for the child. Lydia's scream split the night. Silas moved like lightning. His Colt cleared leather. The hammer snapped back. A single shot cracked the sky. The bullet screamed into the darkness above, echoing off the flats. The mob froze. Smoke curled from Silas's revolver as his gaze leveled over them, steel gray and cold. "You lay a hand on her or the child," he said, low and steady, "and I'll plant you right here." The man who had lunged stumbled backward, hands shaking. A few muttered curses, but not one stepped into that doorway again. The house held its ground. Lydia trembled, tears shining, stunned that someone had stood between her and the world for nothing but decency. The child cried, and she pressed her lips to its crown, a sob breaking loose, equal parts fear and relief. Silas lowered his gun, holstered it, and pressed the door shut against the angry voices. This time the latch held. Inside, the hearth crackled on. Lydia stared at the man who had claimed nothing, asked for nothing, yet given what no one else had dared, protection. Could she trust the ground under her feet now, or would it shift again? Morning spread gold across the desert rim, light pooling on the ranch like a promise. Lydia woke with the baby tucked close, wrapped in the rough wool blanket he'd handed her. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't been jolted awake by jeers or cold stone. Instead, the faint smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. She rose slowly, weak in body, heart unsteady. The room felt strange yet safe, a place she hadn't earned but sorely needed. She wanted to show she wasn't just a burden, not simply a woman leaning on another's strength. With shaking hands, she hauled water, scrubbed a shirt, set a pot of beans to simmer with a heel of bread warming by the fire. By the time Silas came from the corral, dust clinging to his boots, the table was set. Lydia waited, brushing the baby's soft hair with her fingers. "You ought to sit," he said quietly, eyes flicking from the dishes to the pallor in her face. "I wanted to help," she whispered. He didn't argue. He laid a folded strip of paper beside her bowl, inked in rough, careful letters. Rest. Fence can wait. Her throat tightened. He could have ordered. Instead, he left her dignity intact. That night the baby's cries shredded the quiet. Exhausted, Lydia rocked and cooed, but the wails only rose. Her arms drooped. Silas filled the doorway. Without a word, he lifted the child from her trembling hands. "Sleep," he murmured, gaze fixed on the infant. He sat beside the hearth, large, scarred hands astonishingly gentle. He whistled, low and steady, some rough trail tune likely born under 1,000 stars. The melody threaded the room until the child's sobs melted to breath. Lydia watched, heart quivering. She had never seen such tenderness in a man. Dangerous hope edged close to long-kept grief. Days found a rhythm. Silas returned from the barn, carrying a small tin pail, and set on the table. "Goat's milk," he said simply. The baby drank greedily, relief clenching Lydia's chest so tight her thanks snagged in it. He tipped his hat and went back to his chores. Later, folding laundry, she found her dress laid neatly over a chair. The torn sleeve had been mended, crooked stitches, careful hands. She traced the thread and blinked hard. His hands were made for rope and reins, not needles, yet he had tried. In the quiet, her thoughts drifted back. Her parents' tired faces, the cracks in their palms, the hunger that shadowed the door. Debt coiled around them like a snake. When Marshall Drake, wealthy, respected, offered marriage, it wasn't romance. It was a bargain. She agreed. She buried her love, her secret, and walked to that altar believing she could endure anything to save the farm. But when her baby's cry betrayed all, when Marshall's fury turned the bargain to ash, she'd been left with nothing but shame. Now, in a stranger's home, she held proof of something else. A pail of milk set without fanfare, clumsy stitches sewn with care, a whistle softening a child's sobs. For the first time since the church steps, she wasn't just surviving. She was being cared for, and the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was beginning to mean something words couldn't carry. What would happen when the past knocked at their door again? The desert night pressed close around the small house, wind tugging at shutters with a mournful cry. The fire had settled to embers, breathing a faint red glow. Lydia tossed in sleep, sweat beading at her hairline, arms tight around the baby. Silas sat by the window, chair tilted back a hair, hat brim low, rifle resting across his knees. Sleep rarely found him. He was used to listening instead, to coyotes in the distance, to the old house creaking, to the soft rhythm of breaths. Then a sound stilled him. Not the horses, not the wind. A woman's broken murmur tangled in a dream. "No, Micah, don't." The land, blood everywhere. Her voice cracked into a sob that seemed to tear in two. Silas's jaw tightened. The name hovered like smoke. Lydia clutched the child tighter, even in sleep. He sat as the darkness thinned into gray. When dawn paled the horizon, he rose. The choice in him had settled. Lydia woke to the baby cooing beside her. Silas stood at the table, shoulders set, pouring water into a tin cup. He didn't look up at first. "You called a name last night," he said. She froze, the breath locking in her chest. "What, Micah?" His voice was even. "You spoke of land. Blood. Who was he?" Silence hung heavy. She sat, clutching her child, and for a long moment the room seemed to shrink. His voice came again, low, unyielding. "Tell me true." Her shoulders slumped. The secret had grown too heavy to carry alone. Micah was the man I loved, she whispered. A trail hand, poor kind. We dreamed of a patch of land, a life carved from dust. Marshall tried to buy that claim. Micah refused. Then one night, men with guns. Shots. He fell where he stood. Her voice frayed. They called it a quarrel. I knew whose money paid them. Tears spilled hot and fast. When my folks learned about the child, they panicked. Micah gone. That's crushing us. Marshall offered marriage, enough coin to keep them from losing the farm. They begged me, think of the family. So I did. I had my baby. I walked to that altar ready to trade my own heart for their survival. But when my child cried, the truth came out, and Marshall tossed me aside like dirt. Silence pressed down. The tin cup creaked in Silas's grip. He turned, I shadowed by a storm he kept leashed. My brother, he said at last, voice low as gravel. He had a creekside patch. Merchants rolled in with papers signed by sheriffs who never saw the soil. When my brother stood his ground, they put him under it and called it justice. He set the cup down hard. Men behind it walked free. Men like Drake. Lydia flinched. I'm sorry. I shouldn't. He cut her off, gaze fixed past her to the horizon. Leather creaked as he pulled his saddle strap tight. We're not done with him. The child fussed softly. Lydia bent to soothe it. Silas didn't draw closer or sweeten his voice, but the set of his shoulders said one thing. The secret was no longer hers alone. Do you feel where this is headed? The sun dipped, casting the ranch in long shadows. The air held an edge that made the skin prickle. Silas had seen faint hoof marks near the wash earlier, but said nothing. His rifle leaned near the door while his hands worked a bridle. Lydia fed the baby by the hearth, unease creeping up her spine. The first shot shattered the quiet. Window glass exploded into the room, shards skittering across the floorboards. Down, Silas barked, hauling Lydia and the child to the floor as another bullet chewed a gouge in the wall. Men's voices roared from outside. Come out, Boone. Hand over the woman, and maybe you'll see another dawn. Marshall's men. Silas's jaw locked. He snatched his rifle, shoved the door open, and fired. A man collapsed into the dust, screaming. Gunfire erupted. Figures surged from behind the trough and fence posts, bullets biting into wood and doorframe. Silas moved with cold economy. Each shot counted, each step sure. He shifted from doorway to water trough to the barn's shadow, breaking their rush. One after another, men fell or crawled away. Still more pressed in. Inside, Lydia huddled with the baby, whispering wild prayers that tangled with the roar of gunfire. The door burst inward. A wild-eyed man lunged, knife glinting, gaze fixed on the child. No! Lydia threw herself between steel and cradle. Silas was quicker. He hurled himself across the room, snatching the baby to his chest. His broad back turned, taking the knife, slash. Leather tore, flesh spared. He twisted, revolver flashing twice. The attacker dropped, blade clattering away. Silence fell except for the baby's cries and Lydia's ragged breath. Silas knelt in the firelight, the child tucked into his arms, gray eyes softening as he looked down at that tiny face. It's all right, he murmured, rough but steady. Safe now. Lydia froze, tears running. She saw not only the quiet rancher, but a man who wore death at his hip and still held her child as if it were sacred. Outside, the remaining men faltered, then fled into the dark. Silas didn't chase. He stayed there, one large hand resting on the baby's head until the cries dwindled to little hiccups. When he returned the child, his fingers lingered around its small shoulders a heartbeat longer than necessary. If you risked your life for us, Lydia whispered. He didn't answer. He reloaded with calm precision. Jaw set, silence heavier than talk. Later, After bodies were dragged beyond the fence and the windows patched with what they had, the fire burned low again. Lydia lay awake longer than she meant to. From the corner of her eye, she saw Silas in the rocker near the hearth, the baby resting in the crook of his arm. He swayed slightly, scarred hand stroking a small back. A low hum slipped from him, halting, old, something born on open-range nights. Slowly the child sank into sleep. The sight hit Lydia harder than the gunfire. Her hand rose to her mouth. Tears shone. This man, who had spoken so little since lifting her from the church, now sat in flickering firelight, humming her child toward peace. Her heart changed its pace. Amid blood and smoke, something tender and unarguable rooted itself. Could anything tear it up now? The desert breathed around the cook fire a few nights later, sage and smoke heavy after the chaos. Silas sat with his back to a post, one boot stretched toward the flames, rifle within easy reach. Lydia fed the baby beside him, fingers smoothing the blanket, grateful just to hear wind instead of gunshots. The echoes of that fight still rattled in her chest. Peace felt fragile as glass. Then came another shadow. Hoofbeats first, steady, unhurried. Silas rose, hand brushing the butt of his Colt. A lean, scarred rider eased out of the dark and dismounted like a man who'd spent more years in the saddle than under a roof. Rafe Dillon. Once, he and Silas had ridden the border country together, chasing raiders, hunting hard men, sharing whiskey and bad jokes under impossible stars. Silas had once hauled him bleeding out of a canyon nobody sane would have climbed. Now Rafe drifted forward, boots crunching. "Been a spell, Boone," he said, voice like gravel. Silas waited, silent. Rafe sank near the fire, grin catching the light. "Heard talk about you dragging a woman and her brat out of Red Hollow like some tale from a dime book. Didn't believe it till now." Lydia stiffened, clutching tighter. Silas's steady glance warned her to keep still. Rafe chuckled, the sound dry. "You're harboring a fugitive. Marshal Drake put a price on her, rich enough to pull bounty men from Tucson clear to Santa Fe. We could split it, Silas. One last ride. You hand her over, we take the gold, and you won't have to drive one more fence post. Enough to buy a valley, build a herd so big it blots the horizon." The fire snapped. The desert held its breath. Lydia's heart thudded hard enough to ache. She looked to Silas and dreaded what he might say. He lowered his eyes to his tin cup, set it on the dirt so gently it thudded soft. His fingers brushed his revolver's grip, but didn't draw. When his gaze rose, his voice was quiet, iron hard. "I don't sell people," he said. "Not her. Not the child. That ain't my kind of gold." Rafe's grin thinned. For a heartbeat, he searched Silas's face for a crack. He found only rock. The fire popped again. The baby whimpered and settled. At last, Rafe stood, dusting his coat. "You always were a fool," he muttered, but the heat had leaked from his words. "One day, thinking like that'll get you killed." Silas didn't move. He watched as Rafe mounted and rode into the dark, hoofbeats fading until only the fire's low hiss remained. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Lydia's voice came, small, raw. "Why? You could have had everything. Gold, land, safety." Silas's jaw worked. He watched the flames crawl over split wood. "Some things aren't for sale," he said. "Not life. Not dignity." Lydia's eyes stung. In that moment, she understood. Silas Boone didn't stand between her and the world out of pity or some polished code. He chose her. He chose this stand because it was right. How long can a choice like that hold in a place like this? The storm rolled over Red Hollow like a rage let loose, rain throwing itself at rooftops, wind ripping shutters from hinges, lightning tearing the dark sky into pieces. Townsfolk poured into the church, walls groaning under the gale. Lanterns trembled. At the center stood Marshal Drake, his fine coat soaked through, voice slicing above the clamor. "She deceived us all," he bellowed. "Lydia, a liar with another man's child in her arms. And Silas Boone, no savior. A thief who stole her to snatch land that isn't his." Murmurs swelled into a second storm. Outside, Silas stood in the rain, one hand on his horse, the other steadying Lydia as she held her baby. The church loomed, the place of her ruin, now the place she would return to. She met his eye. He nodded. Together they walked inside. The doors slammed back, thunder cracked. All faces swung toward them. Lydia, pale but unbroken, child tucked tight. Silas, tall and silent, rain dripping from his brim. Marshall's face flushed a furious red. "There," he snarled, pointing. "The traitor himself brings sin back into God's house. You'll regret this, Boone." His hired men shifted, hands grazing pistols. Silas's boots echoed as he stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was calm, firm. "You left her at these steps, Drake," he said. "I picked her up, not for gold, not for land, because no one deserves to be dropped in the dust with a crying child." The words rang like a bell. Whispers changed, growing less sure. Doubt walked the pews. Marshall's rage boiled over. "You're a killer playing holy," he spat, hand yanking his revolver free. He pointed at Lydia. "You should have died in that cell." Chaos jumped. Gasps, screams, feet scraping wood. Lydia froze, clutching child. Silas moved. He shoved Lydia and the baby behind the pulpit, twisting even as his revolver cleared leather. Thunder boomed as gunfire snapped. Marshall shot first. The bullet tore cloth and skin along Silas's side. He fired back, not at Marshall, but at the beam behind him. Wood exploded into splinters. Shock threw Marshall backward. His revolver flew and skittered across the floor. The church fell still except for the storm outside battering the walls. Marshall scrambled crab-like, arrogance stripped down to fear. His men froze, pinned by Silas's stare. Silas's voice was iron. "If any of you still by his lies, stand with him. But if you've got eyes, you saw what he is." The silence cracked. A woman who'd once drawn water with Lydia moved first, laying a trembling hand on her shoulder. "I believe her," she whispered. Others followed, men who'd traded with Micah, neighbors once cold. One by one, they crossed the room, standing between Lydia and Marshall. His face twisted. "Fools," he spat, staggering up. "You'll regret this." But nobody moved to help. Nobody reached for him. He lurched to the door and vanished into the storm, his name sinking into the mud with each step. The church quieted. Rain pounded the roof. Lydia wept freely, clutching the baby, not from despair but relief. She turned to Silas, blood streaking his shirt, breath caught. His gun hung low, his eyes had softened. He reached for her hand, his grip steady, grounding. For the first time since she'd been cast out, the weight lifted from her chest. The storm had cracked, and with it, the shackles of shame. What new day would follow? The tempest scoured Red Hollow clean, as if the town itself wished to wash away what it had harbored. For weeks, whispers still threaded through doorways and across market stalls. Some muttered of scandal and punishment, of a woman who ought never have come back. But others began to speak different words. They named Marshall as he was, greedy, cowardly, the kind who twists lies for land and coin. And they spoke of Lydia not as the abandoned bride, but as the woman the quiet rancher had shielded when no one else would. Silas paid no mind to talk, but he noticed how Lydia's chin lifted a fraction higher when she walked the street beside him, the child tucked close. The burden she had carried alone was now held between two hands. Back at the ranch, life settled into a patient hum. Silas sold a portion of his cattle. The coins bought timber and tools. With his hands, he raised stronger walls, patched the roof so storms would search in vain for leaks, and built a small room with a window that caught morning light. He never said what it was for, but Lydia knew when she found the clean quilt folded at the foot of the little cradle he'd carved himself. Rough edges, steady craft, no less sure for its imperfections. Small moments stitched their days together. Silas showing her how to sit astride a horse, his hand firm at her waist when nerves made her stiffen, his gruff patience as he taught her to guide the reins, his quiet pride when she laughed for the first time in months as the horse danced beneath her across the pasture. On cold nights, he sat by the fire after she and the child had fallen asleep, feeding the flames, gaze drifting to the wooden cradle as if guarding more than wood. More than once, she woke at dawn to find him there, broad shoulders slumped with fatigue, but eyes soft, watching the child breathe. What do you call such watchfulness if not care? One evening, with the baby finally asleep, Lydia sat near the hearth and watched him rub oil into worn leather. Her voice came quiet, almost lost to the crackle of sticks. "I was left at the church steps with nothing but shame," she said. "You gave me a home." He paused, the cloth going still in his hand. For a long moment, he didn't look up. Then he set the saddle aside and let his rough fingers brush lightly over hers. His voice was low, steady. "Home isn't walls, Lydia," he said. "It's who shares the fire." Her throat thickened. She turned her hand and caught his. In a warm glow, for the first time, the word home opened to include her. Spring came, and the grass ran green out to a horizon scrubbed clean by winter's storms. One morning, as sunrise poured gold over the flats, Silas stepped onto the porch with the baby in his arms. Lydia moved beside him, shawl pulled close, eyes fixed on a line where earth met sky. The child gurgled and reached a small hand toward light. Silas held tighter. Lydia's fingers slipped into his. Together, they stood as the day opened fully, three shadows long across the pasture. A woman once thrown aside, a man who had built a life inside his own silence, and a child pulling them both forward. Not pieces broken beyond repair, but a family drawn up from ash, forged in fire, steady as the land beneath their boots. In a place where law was harsh and mercy scarce, they had found something worth more than acreage and coin. A home not built from timber alone, but from trust, sacrifice, and a love that did not ask for proof. As the horizon called them onward, their story lingered, a reminder that even in the roughest country, love can take root and grow. If this story found you, tap like and subscribe for more. Tell us in the comments what moments stayed with you and what you'd like to hear next.